Afternoon, Joe. I've just given you permissions to share. If you have a slide deck or something you want to share on the screen, you can do that at any time. We're already in the room here. Sorry, we don't have a camera. We have at least one online participant currently as well, so you can begin whenever you like.
Okay, bear with me. I want to share. Can you hear me?
Yes, you sound fine.
Oh,
Hey, Doug. Oh, here's your buddy Doug.
oh, okay. I was just trying to call him because I was trying to figure out what was going on. All right.
We don't know either.
We're all. Anyways, number one, thank you for the opportunity to speak. And this is a different type of community for me. I'm a control system engineer that is essentially, quote unquote, on the defensive side, trying to make sure that we have power, water, natural gas. In other words, that control systems work. And I've gotten into the world where it's for everything I want to have happen, bad guys want to do the opposite. I also wanted to point out one other thing, that I'm actually giving a presentation in 2 weeks, or actually less than 2 weeks, on the 23rd, to the Air War College. And this is for the Center for Strategic Deterrent Strategies. And my intent is to potentially use what we're talking about here. So let me kind of start where all of this is coming from. What this says is I've been around for a long time. I'm actually a nuclear engineer and came out of that world into most of the others because control systems are used pretty much everywhere. I wanted to really quick just explain the title of my book, because I think you all might also find it interesting. The title is Protecting Industrial Control Systems from Electronic Threats. The word protecting is used is because it's not difficult to hack or compromise a control system. It's rocket science to protect it and still allow it to do its function. It says industrial control systems. I wrote the book in 2010 because at the time, most of the people involved were what I would call from smokestack industries, electric, water, manufacturing, oil, gas, chemicals. If I had to do it over again, I'd take out the word industrial because everybody uses control systems. And I want to explain where the term electronic threats comes from, because you'll notice I don't use the word hacking in the title. And where this came from was I was at the Electric Power Research Institute for almost 15 years. And in 2000 started the control system cybersecurity program for the electric utilities. And I left EPRI in 2002. And I started the first control system cybersecurity conference in August 2002. And just to give you a flavor for what that kind of meant, I had invited people I knew who were control system people. I didn't know IT. I didn't know, if you will, different types of offensive types, because I always came from the defensive side. 3 entities came to my conference I didn't invite. Not that I didn't want them, I just didn't know who they were. The first was the National Transportation Safety Board. And I was in, what in the world is NTSB doing at a control system cybersecurity conference? It turns out they were finalizing the report on the Bellingham, Washington Olympic pipeline rupture. Oh, by the way, that was cyber. Was it malicious? I don't think so. Was it cyber? Absolutely. There was also two people from a country in Asia. And I couldn't figure out why they were there until I talked to them afterwards. They had had a couple of control system cyber incidents that took out 10% of the generation in their country. And the third was a representative from the Idaho National Laboratory. And that meeting with them eventually resulted in the formation of the SCADA testbed at Idaho. Now, in fact, let me go back. The whole point about electronic threats was at my second conference, this is April 2003, we still didn't have a SCADA testbed yet. I was doing work for Navy Mission Assurance in Dahlgren, Virginia, on, of all things, electromagnetic pulse. But Dahlgren had a test range. So I had them give a presentation at my second conference, again, April 2003. This is a totally unclassified conference. The first slide on Navy letterhead was a Navy destroyer was coming into the port of San Diego. They had not turned off their high power pulse radar systems. That Navy destroyer took out San Diego Gas and Electric and the San Diego Water Authority SCADA systems. Cyber, of course, was it what most people would think of as being cyber? No, but it was. The second slide that was provided by the Navy was they were doing pulse radar testing in Europe and ended up blowing up a 36-inch pipeline. The point being that cyber can act like sticks of dynamite. You know, bits and bytes are more than just data. And, you know, where I'm coming from, these things are being used today. Now, cyber has always been looked at, you know, if you will, as a weapon of war for stealing or being able to view or manipulate data. What's different and what I'm going to be talking about is cyber can also be used to cause physical damage, inadvertent operation, or mislead operators. And that's the part that's new, or at least new to many, many people. I should also bring up one point, and that is, what is a cyber incident? It's electronic communication between systems or systems and people that can affect confidentiality, integrity, or availability, you know, the CIA triad. And the point being, it does not have to be malicious. The CIA triad is really for IT because as a control system engineer, the most important thing I care about is safety. And you don't see that. The other thing I care about a lot is availability of the process, not availability of data. Now, here's kind of a little history of control system cybersecurity as it would affect, if you will, defense, offense, etc., and war planning. The first, I think most people have heard of, was 2009-10 Stuxnet, which the US and Israel used to damage the centrifuges in the Natanz in Iran. And one of the things that occurred there that was very different is this was the first time that hacking was able to, if you will, a cyber attack was made to look like an equipment malfunction, not a network issue, which is why for over a year, the centrifuges in Natanz were screaming. They were being torn apart. But for over a year, Iran thought it was nothing but a systemic design flaw in those centrifuges until they had ended up sending a laptop to Belarus. And lo and behold, Stuxnet was on that laptop. That's how Iran found Stuxnet. Russia has had a long history of cyber attacking its neighbors. In 2017, I believe, we thought it would, the logical thing is we thought this was Iran. This was a cyber attack on one of the largest petrochemical plants in the world. This was in Saudi Arabia. And it wasn't just a cyber attack. This was a cyber attack against the safety systems. This was meant to blow up a plant. In 2015, 16, and 22, Russia cyber attacked the Ukrainian power grids. In 15 and 16, it was quote unquote standalone. It was not done with any physical attacks attached to it. In 22, it was done, in conjunction with, the rocket and other, drone attacks, etc. And the reason for the title on this is, I believe it was in 22, Russia cyber attacked the radiation monitors at the Chernobyl exclusion zone. And I'm going to go into that in more detail. China, up until recently, and I'll go through this again in more detail, China has always been one for economic sabotage. China was not looked at as trying to cause physical damage. That changed in 2019 or 20, when we found that China had installed hardware backdoors in large electric power transformers. And there was a US presidential executive order on that in 2020. And in 2024, this year, in February, there was a presidential executive order about port cranes, Chinese-made port cranes, because I think somewhere over 80% of the port cranes in North America come from China. Iran, last Thanksgiving, cyber attacked a number of controllers that are used throughout our infrastructures. And again, I've got a Director of National Intelligence chart. I'll show you about this. But what makes this really fascinating or scary, this is a cyber attack against the supply chain of critical infrastructure in the United States. What they did was cyber attack what's called Unitronics. Unitronics makes controllers used in electric, water, oil, gas, chemicals, food, transportation, you name it. What's the big thing about Unitronics? They're made in Israel. This was Iran cyber attacking, targeting these Israeli controllers used in US critical infrastructure. And then, I think you're all aware of what happened last month with Israel cyber attacking pagers, walkie-talkies, and according to the Lebanese paper, also solar systems. By the way, if there's questions, let me know.
Okay, we'll do.
Okay, Stuxnet, if you're not aware, was meant really to preclude having to have a physical attack against those centrifuges. So the hope was that by cyber, they could, minimize the need for any type of physical attack. The centrifuges were inside a mountain and not connected to the internet. So as far as Iran was concerned, they had the ultimate air gap and nobody could get to it. Well, the point here was what they did is since the US and Israel, or since the attackers, because we haven't, quote unquote, officially come out and said that, what the attackers did was to use compromised USB sticks that actually had, quote unquote, the malware on it. And what they did was they were able to get the people doing the maintenance on those Siemens controllers to use those USB sticks, which is how they were able to get the Stuxnet malware into the system. I mentioned the cyber attacks appeared to be equipment malfunctions, and the operator displays indicated no problems because there was a man in the middle attack that basically replayed the equipment being in good shape. So, when the operators looked at the system, despite the fact that they could hear the centrifuges being torn apart, they had no reason to suspect cyber. And it took more than a year to identify the equipment as being cyber related. And it did delay uranium weapons production for a significant period of time. And there's a couple of other points too. What was done with the centrifuges was not unique to the centrifuges. That same approach could be used to any industrial process, any. The other thing, to give you an idea of how we're not looking, in 2008, the Idaho National Lab and Siemens gave a presentation at the Siemens International User Group Conference in Chicago. They essentially described Stuxnet. Only in 2008, nobody had a clue what it meant, that you were able to change the essentially the computer code inside the engineer's workstation, and he couldn't see it. That's what was presented in 2008. And at that point in time, nobody had a clue what the significance of that was. Now, China and critical infrastructure. This first point was CISA stating that up until recently, China wasn't going about trying to physically damage things. It was focused primarily on political and economic espionage. I think you're probably have all heard about Volt Typhoon. Volt Typhoon is not what we're talking about. Volt Typhoon is going after routers. What was found was in 2019, in fact, before that, I think it was in 2021, I'm going to work it backward. The DNI put out a document about, an assessment of the cybersecurity status. And what they said was, this is DNI, saying that port cranes, inverters, circuit breakers, and large power transformers are cyber vulnerable. Well, what happened was in 2019, a U.S. Department of Energy electric substation was replacing 3 small transformers with one big, large new one. And in this period of time, the US was not manufacturing large electric transformers. So in this case, WAPA, the Western Area Power Administration, was forced by the powers that be in Washington to have to buy least cost a quote unquote foreign power transformer, and least cost meant China. So in 2019, this large 400-ton transformer was delivered. And as the engineers were doing the site install, they actually saw extra electronics inside the transformer. This is what led to Presidential Executive Order 13920. And the other thing it led to is a large Chinese power transformer being sent to the Sandia National Laboratory to be torn apart because nobody knew what was in there. Now realize there are over 400 large Chinese transformers in the US power grid today. Well, the scary part is the report that came out of Sandia on this large electric power transformer was classified as top secret. Think about that. Now let's talk a little bit about Russia and Iran in terms of hacking US systems. All the way back in 2011, there was a small water utility that, and this is a very small one, they didn't even have their own maintenance staff. So they used a contractor. This was a water utility in Illinois. And they used a contractor from St. Louis. It turns out that contractor was Russian. He was born and raised in Russia before he came here. He and his family went to Russia on vacation. The water utility needed some work done on their SCADA system. They had him, remote in from Russia into that SCADA system in Illinois. This wasn't a hack. This was the utility asking him to do it. Now, this was in the June, July timeframe. By November, the SCADA system was having real problems. There were a number of Russian email addresses there, or URLs. Bottom line, the SCADA system eventually went down, and with it took a water pump. Russia had cyber attacked. They didn't mean to do it. They were just trying to see what could happen. Like I say, the Illinois Fusion Center, which is was part of DHS, put out a formal report. Only DHS, for reasons only they can answer, basically made it go away. Now, the next set of Russian hacking of US water systems occurred earlier this year. And again, I've got I'll show you with the DNI report. And I mentioned Iran hacking the Unitronics controllers. Here is the DNI report from June 2024. Can you see it? Is it reasonably visible?
Yeah, we can see it.
So look at this. Cyber Avengers is the IRGC. This is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. 29 total attacks. Everything you see was blue is the Iranians hacking. And that this is food, counties, water, a port in California. You'll notice all of those. And then the Russian attacks were really just the water systems, though there was one energy system. This is from November 23 to April 24. Now, you'll also notice what's interesting, there's no mention of China in here. These were active cyber attacks on our critical infrastructure here. Now I wanted to go to, like I say, what happened in Chernobyl. And I'm not going to go through all of the technical details. Ruben Santamarta and Kim Zetter. Kim really wrote based on what Ruben did, and Ruben did based on what a colleague of mine actually did because he was actually out in the Ukraine. But basically what happened is there is an exclusion zone around the Chernobyl nuclear plants. Remember, they had that big core melt and spewed all of this radiation. And so there is a lot of radiation sensors around the Chernobyl nuclear plant. What happened in 2022 was a very large increase in radiation. We're talking tens of thousands of times over normal that occurred as the Russians were going into, if you remember at the beginning of the Russian-Ukrainian war, Russia was going into Chernobyl. Well, what happened was people started asking, it didn't seem like what was going on was real. Now realize when the Ukrainians saw this really, really high radiation, they didn't go in and try and, attack the Russians. The Russians won that battle without firing a shot. And what happened was that they basically cyber attacked the sensors and the sensing system, not the physical sensors, in this case, the sensing system was very cyber vulnerable. And the Russians were able to cyber attack it and change the readings. And the point being, because of all of the commotion around that exclusion zone, nobody really looked hard to say, does that really make any sense? And so for probably a year and a half or 2 years, those very high radiation readings were taken as gospel. Well, like I say, then work started because the readings didn't make sense because you had some sensors with very, very high readings and other sensors close to it with the older, very, very low readings. And it didn't make any sense. And that's when they started going through all of these sensor readings to try to establish if there was a physics-based explanation for these very, very high sensor readings. And the net bottom line was there wasn't. There is no way to physically explain these extremely high radiation levels. So what you're doing is working backwards to say, these readings were hacked because it was the only way they could have done it. And the systems that were hacked had no cybersecurity. And like I say, what are the impacts of everything we're talking about? You know, in one case, the Ukrainian troops couldn't enter a high radiation area. China can threaten our power grid by saying if the US responds, you know, to anything in Taiwan, China can turn off the power to Seattle. In fact, a Chinese transformer, this is directly from the Chinese Transformers website, has a transformer that supplies roughly 10% of the power to New York City. Chinese transformers supply something like 18% of the power to Las Vegas. China's in a position to threaten our power grids. Russia and Iran, you know, can and have are in a position to do the same, including critical infrastructure supporting our military bases. And now start thinking about like what just happened with Israel, you know, what they did with the pagers and the walkie-talkies and how that's influenced the entire, you know, war with Hezbollah. You know, complete loss of communication, complete loss of trust, everything. And here's the other point about what happened there, again, without trying to explain the how, who, or why. Most people have said that you either have a supply chain problem or you have cyber attacks. The pagers and walkie-talkies were supply chain and cyber attacks, because what effectively was done is they made these pagers essentially into hand grenades with pins in them. And the only way to pull the pin was by cyber. This really opens up completely different views of warfare and what can be done with cyber and physical attacks. And I'll also add one other. And we don't know if this was malicious or not, though there are some thoughts that it may have been. But a Navy ship was completely disabled while at sea from control system cyber. I mean, there are things that can absolutely be done that can affect what you are trying to do. And what makes everything so disconcerting is our process sensors, where you measure pressure, level, flow, temperature, voltage, current, etc. Our actuators, which is where you open or close valves, turn motors on or off, etc., have no cybersecurity, no authentication, and no cyber forensics to this day anywhere. And this isn't just the older, if you will, analog devices. This is also our newest digital devices. So when you combine what you can do physically with what you can do via cyber, I think it opens up a very, very different view of what's going on. Questions?
I don't hear any.
And by the way, my intent under the too much information is to provide this to what I may be giving, like I say, at the Air War College.
Yeah,
Because I think this is probably more relevant than when I was going to try to do the more, you know, engineering technical thing.
well, it certainly is timely.
So, yeah.
The engineering technical thing, Joe, I still think the biggest threat to us is our own stupidity.
Well,
It is even more timely to remind us that we have to protect our systems.
you know, let me kind of take you back to, remember, I'm a control system engineer. You know, I'm always on the defensive side. You know, if I want to get on the offensive side, I read Ludlum or do something like that. Okay. When I was running the fossil plant instrumentation and control systems program at EPRI in like 98, I had the head of IT come in and ask me to address cyber. And I'm going, we don't care about email. And I told him, get out of my office. Okay. That is where most of the engineers in every industry are to this day. They do not believe cyber is an issue to them. They believe cyber is email. And here's the other problem. All of our cyber people, I shouldn't say all, but an awful lot of them, including those that are in the leadership roles here, view cyber as only things that are affected by internet protocols, you know, or internet protocol networks.
Right.
And that's flat not right. And so we are stumbling through everything to this day. In fact, I'll give you one last one. 2 weeks ago, I was in Houston, or 3 weeks ago, the 24th of September, for a cybersecurity conference. And my title was, of all things, OT cybersecurity, the cure can be worse than the disease. Well, this was in Houston at the George Brown Convention Center. I don't know how many people know what it is. It's this big convention center downtown.
Yep.
The last time I was in there was on 9/10. We had two control system cyber sessions on 9/10, 2001. It was the day before 9/11, so it was not national security, it was business. Gartner hadn't written their paper on what is OT until 2006. So on 9/10/2001, almost everybody there was just engineers, and it was just because of business. Fast forward to September 24th. We had a session in Houston. 90 people attended. Again, it was an OT session, 90 people. By show of hands, we asked how many were network security and how many were engineering. One engineer.
Wow.
180. This is 180 degrees different than it was on 2001.
You should be able to pick 90 people out of the phone book and get more engineers than that.
They don't believe it's a problem.
Yeah.
And you know what's worse? Senior leadership across the board. There was just this big water meeting like a day or two ago. I put this out, this blog about, you know, the George Brown thing. And I said, there is one electric utility I know of, one, that is addressing control system cyber, and no water utility, none, that are addressing control system cyber. Suffice it to say, I've got a lot of people who are upset, but there isn't any who are addressing sensors, actuators, and drives. They're all doing IT. And I'll give you one last one. Have you heard about the old SMAR water hack in Florida a couple of years ago?
I don't think so.
Anyways, that was a water treatment facility outside of Tampa, probably been destroyed by Milton. But what happened was, quote unquote, somebody driving by, because the operator displays used, what was it? Anyways, a very cyber vulnerable or not protocol, but program, so you could remotely view your screens. And the lye concentration in that water treatment facility went up by something like 10,000.
Wow.
Well, the world basically said, oh my God, we've been hacked, da-da-da-da-da-da. And the EPA put out cybersecurity requirements. Lo and behold, it turns out it was operator error. It had nothing whatsoever to do with the control system. And this is what the EPA water cybersecurity requirements are based on.
We have met the enemy and they is us.
Pogo is winning. And
Well,
like
Joe,
I say, I've got a lot of water people saying, oh, we're taking this seriously. And remember, DOD needs clean water, regardless of where they are.
Yep.
My stuff, I'm not looking at the F-22. I'm looking at the, the fuel tanks for the F-22. Or the lights, or the water, or the gas. We have no cybersecurity there.
And there is a water supply on those things for the pilots. And if that were contaminated, it would really degrade the performance of the aircraft. Is anybody safeguarding the quality of that water?
One would think, wouldn't one? Anyways, that's my presentation. Thank you for your interest. I'm curious as to your reaction.
Yeah, well, you're sounding an alarm that definitely needs to be sounded and your voice amplified 10,000 times before we come to regret it. So
yeah, well, let me tell you the really scary part. The original presidential decision directive on cyber securing our critical infrastructures was PDD 63. Do you know who issued that?
nope.
President Clinton.
Wow, that was a long
In
time ago.
1998. This is why I didn't understand why the head of IT was coming to me. I wasn't aware of that at the time. By PDD 63 said all critical infrastructures were to be secure within 5 years. Yeah, that's 2003.
Wow.
You want to count the number of presidential administrations that have gone through, and we still don't have any security with these devices?
Have they even defined what critical systems are? I mean,
Yeah, they define them. But what's happening? They're focusing on the network part of those systems.
Gotcha. Yeah.
The whole thing is the engineers have been kept out. Really, since probably the Gartner paper that came out with the term OT. Because that's when you had all of these network people that were IT, all of a sudden were OT.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, yeah, thank you for bringing the topic to the attention of the conference. We really appreciate that. Is it okay? Well, you've got your email address up on a slide there, so anybody who wants to contact you with questions is going to be able to, and I hope they do. So,
do you have any more about Ukraine?
Excuse me, can you repeat that, please?
I'm sorry. Do you have any more about Ukraine? You did have that one story.
There's I put the I've got here, let me go backward. Here are some references to what happened there. I decided I didn't want to go through and reproduce things that were already there. I just wanted to talk about, here's what they're finding. Or like I say, the reports that were put out. These are public. And I wrote a blog on what Ruben wrote, because I actually had to do a project in my nuclear days because the nuclear plant simulator, the radiation readings weren't correct. So I had to go through and correct them. So I was doing back in the early 70s for good what Russia did a few years ago for bad. Part of what it's saying is this is absolutely possible to do.
Yeah. Any more questions?
We really need to do more to disseminate to the defense and intelligence community information and the importance of non-cyber network control system protection. What you've given us is a start. We need to do more. I don't know how to pursue it, but you and I have talked about it. We should talk about it some more.
Yeah, and one thing I'd like to be really clear is, and it's what Stuxnet demonstrated. It doesn't have to look like a cyber attack.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right.
To be a cyber attack. But what's more, it doesn't matter. Doug, you brought this up when I did the Moore's presentation. It doesn't have to be malicious to cause problems.
Yep.
Yeah.
Our own stupidity can be our biggest enemy.
Very good point.
And part of why things I bring up, people don't like it, is if it doesn't look like Russia, Iran, or China did it, they say then it's not cyber. There were people that said that CrowdStrike fiasco was not a cyber incident.
Yeah. Whether it was or not, and this is something we also talked about during your Moore's presentation, you look at something like a pandemic, you know a lot more about pandemics than they do about control systems. Once something happens, you really don't care.
Yeah.
Whether it's a malicious human actor origin or some random mutation or somebody's mistake somewhere. Once something gets started, what you have to do about it is the same.
Yeah, the damage is the damage. Doesn't matter.
That's as an engineer, what you said is exactly where I live. I don't care why it happened. I just care that it happened.
Right.
Or I care that I can do something to try to prevent it from happening.
Now, the flip side of that we should all be careful about is get people looking more carefully at what can I do to improve the robustness, security of my systems. You are introducing a major new source of trouble.
Yes. No good deed goes unpunished.
Destructive repair is much more common than we like to admit because nobody ever wants to talk about that when it happens. As I like to tell people, if you have a problem that you're sleeping too well at night, not worrying enough, give me a call. I can fix that for you.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Joe. We're going to get ready for the next call. But again, we definitely appreciate this very well composed and timely presentation. I think this was a really good addition to the canon of presentations we've had at the conference this year. Hope to see you next year as well.
I hope,
I'm on the other side of the country, so it would,
I hope to see you at other conferences well before that. I'd really like to promote awareness of what you're doing and what you're talking about.
Right on. And I actually came out here from Idaho, so, you know, you never know, we might run into each other.
Yeah, I actually, like I say, I actually helped Idaho start the skated test. bed.
Yeah, that caught my attention at the beginning when you mentioned it. So, all right, well, have a great evening, Joe. Thanks again. And I hope you can tune into one of the calls coming up in the next hour, and we'll see you later.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity, and I hope it made sense.
Yeah, the pleasure was ours, believe
Thanks
me.
again for the presentation.
Bye-bye.
Bye, all.